Nico Rossetti ran the city's underground, but on his 40th birthday, a snobby maître d' publicly humiliated him over a reservation. Blood was seconds from spilling. That is until a heavy-set, exhausted single mother with a maxed-out credit card and absolutely zero patience stepped in and altered Mafia history. The rain in Chicago that Tuesday evening was relentless, the kind of freezing downpour that soaked through the wool of a custom Italian suit in seconds. Nico Rossetti didn't care. Today was his 40th birthday, and for the first time in 15 years he was entirely alone. No bodyguards, no sycophants, no lieutenants kissing the ring. He had deliberately slipped away from his own heavily fortified compound in the Gold Coast, craving just 1 hour of absolute silence and a dry-aged ribeye at L'Étoile d'Or, the most exclusive French-American steakhouse in the city. Nico was a ghost to the general public, a name whispered in back rooms and feared in shipping yards but rarely photographed. He didn't look like a mob boss tonight. He just looked like a tired, soaking wet businessman in a charcoal suit, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his jaw tight with the kind of stress that came from discovering your underboss, a man you trusted like a brother, was skimming from the union accounts. He pushed open the heavy brass-trimmed glass doors of the restaurant. The warm air inside smelled of truffles, expensive perfume, and old money. The chatter of the city's elite filled the dining room. Nico approached the host stand, shaking the water from his broad shoulders. Standing behind the polished mahogany podium was a man who looked like he'd been genetically engineered to look down his nose at people. His gold name tag read, "Alistair, table for one." Nico said his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that usually made men twice Alistair's size drop their gaze. Alistair looked up, his eyes doing a slow, excruciating sweep of Nico's damp suit, noting the lack of a tie, and the rainwater dripping onto the imported Persian rug. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "No," Nico replied simply. "But I know you keep the corner booth in the back open for VIPs. I'll take that." Alistair offered a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "I'm afraid L'Étoile d'Or is fully committed this evening. We are booked out 6 months in advance. I cannot accommodate walk-ins. Especially—" Alistair's eyes flicked down to Nico's wet leather shoes. "Those who do not meet our strictly enforced dress code." Nico's jaw muscles feathered. The men in his organization knew that specific twitch. It was the warning tremor before a devastating earthquake. "It's my birthday," Nico said, keeping his voice dangerously quiet. "I want a steak. I'm willing to pay triple the menu price for the table. Don't make this difficult." "Sir," Alistair said, his voice rising a fraction to draw the attention of nearby diners, a calculated move to embarrass the intruder. "You cannot buy your way into this establishment. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security." Nico's hands slowly balled into fists. He calculated the distance across the podium. It would take less than 2 seconds to drag Alistair over the mahogany and teach him exactly who he was talking to. The violent impulse was a rising tide in his chest. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind Nico. It wasn't the silky, breathless voice of the socialites that usually populated the restaurant. It was firm, slightly winded, and entirely unapologetic. Nico turned. Standing there was a woman shaking out a bright yellow umbrella. She was fat, a large, broad-hipped woman with a soft, round face, thick thighs, and a generous belly that pushed against the fabric of her damp floral wrap dress. She wasn't trying to hide her size. She occupied her space with a grounded, exhausted dignity. Beside her, clutching her hand, was a little boy of about 6, wearing a slightly too large suit jacket and a clip-on bow tie. "I have a reservation," she said, stepping up to the podium. She dumped her heavy, worn leather purse onto the pristine mahogany. "Emma Collins. Table for 2. And quite frankly, my feet are killing me, so I'd love to sit down." Alistair blinked his disdain, now pivoting to Emma. He took in her wet hair, her cheap dress, and her heavy frame, with a poorly concealed grimace. He checked his tablet. "Ah, yes, Ms. Collins, the anniversary promotion winner." "That's right," Emma said, her hazel eyes flashing with a sharp protective instinct as she pulled her son a little closer. She had saved for months, entered a local radio contest, and fought tooth and nail to give her son Noah a fancy dinner for his own birthday. "And this gentleman is with us." Nico froze. He stared at her, genuinely bewildered. Emma looked at Nico, giving him a swift, assessing once-over. She saw a wet, miserable-looking man being bullied by a snob on his birthday. Emma knew what it felt like to be looked down on. She'd spent her whole life being judged by salespeople, waiters, and managers who thought her weight made her invisible or unworthy of basic respect. "Uncle Dom, right," Emma said smoothly, though a slight flush crept up her thick neck. She reached out and wrapped her warm, plump hand around his rigid forearm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I told you we were running late. Come on, we're starving." Alistair looked appalled. "Ms. Collins, your reservation is strictly for 2. "Then bring an extra chair," Emma snapped, leaning over the podium. Her sheer physical presence forced the manager to lean back. "He's family. It's his birthday. And if you try to turn my uncle away into the freezing rain, I will call the local news station and tell them exactly how L'Etoile d'Or treats single mothers who won their charity contest. I'm sure that will look fantastic on your Yelp page." Alistair turned a spectacular shade of puce. He looked at Emma, heavy-set, fierce, and entirely immovable. He looked at Nico, tall, dark, and radiating silent menace. "Right this way," Alistair choked out. Emma smiled a wide, genuine beam that transformed her face, making her look strikingly beautiful. "Thank you so much. Come on, Uncle Dom." She practically towed the most dangerous man in Chicago into the dining room. They were seated at a cramped table near the kitchen doors, a petty final insult from Alistair. The chairs were narrow, clearly not designed for a woman of Emma's size, but she wedged herself into the booth with practiced ease, sighing in relief as she took the weight off her aching feet. Noah scrambled in beside her, his eyes wide as he took in the crystal chandeliers. Nico sat across from them, still trying to process what had just happened. Nico Rossetti, who commanded an army of hitmen, had just been rescued by a plus-size baker in a wet, floral dress. "I don't know who you are," Nico said softly, leaning forward. "But you didn't have to do that." Emma waved a dismissive hand, reaching for the breadbasket. "Please. Guys like that thrive on making people feel small. I deal with it all the time. People look at a fat woman in a cheap dress and assume they can walk all over me. I wasn't about to let him do it to you, especially on your birthday." She broke off a piece of a baguette and handed it to her son. "I'm B. This is Noah. He's 6 today." "We share a birthday," Nico murmured, looking at the boy. "Happy birthday, Noah." "Thank you, mister," Noah said shyly. "Mummy said we get to eat fire today." Emma laughed, a rich, full-bellied sound that Nico realized he hadn't heard in years. The women in his world, the mafia wives, the mistresses, were surgically altered, starving themselves, communicating in sharp whispers and calculating smiles. Emma was loud, soft, and overwhelmingly real. "Crêpe Suzette, sweetie," she corrected her son. "They light it on fire at the table." She looked back at Nico. "So, Uncle Dom, I assume you're not actually an uncle to anyone in this zip code. What do? You look like a banker who just lost a very large bet." Something like that, Nico said. I'm in waste management and importing. My name is Nico. Well, Nico, order whatever you want. I know it's a promotion, but I saved up a little extra for the tip and drinks. Consider it a birthday gift from a stranger. Nico felt a strange, tight sensation in his chest. This woman, who clearly didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, was offering to buy him dinner. He pulled his leather wallet from his jacket. B, I appreciate the rescue, but I'm paying for this entire table. Whatever you want. The most expensive steak, the lobster, the flaming desserts. It's on me. B's eyes narrowed slightly, a spark of stubborn pride lighting up. She leaned forward, her heavy chest resting against the table edge. Listen, Nico. I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I brought my son here to celebrate, and I am paying our way. I'm a big girl. I carry my own weight in every sense of the word. You buy your steak, I'll buy our chicken, and we can just enjoy the company. Nico stared at her. Nobody told him no. Nobody. But looking into her resolute hazel eyes, he found himself nodding a rare, genuine smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Fair enough, B. Fair enough. The dinner was a revelation. Nico, usually hyper-vigilant and paranoid, found himself relaxing. B talked about her job managing a chaotic wholesale bakery in the South Side, her struggles with her ex-husband, who had skipped town, and her unabashed love for reality television. She ate heartily, not picking at her food like the women he knew, but enjoying every buttery bite of her meal with vocal appreciation. Nico found himself utterly captivated by the way she moved, the way her soft flesh settled, as she laughed the fierce, unconditional love she showered on her son. But as the plates were cleared for dessert, the illusion of safety shattered. Nico's instincts, honed by decades of street survival, suddenly flared. He glanced over B's shoulder. A man had just entered the dining room. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a heavy leather jacket, and his hand was tucked casually inside it. Nico recognized him instantly. It was Tommy, the Hatchet, Viti, a known enforcer for Carmine Russo, the very underboss, Nico, suspected of stealing from him. Nico's blood ran cold. He quickly scanned the room. By the bar, another man had taken up a position. By the fire exit, a third. It's a trap, Nico realized with sickening clarity. Alistair's refusal at the front door. The delay. The specific placement of this table near the kitchen doors a dead end. Carmine knew he was coming here. Carmine had paid off the restaurant. They weren't here to talk. They were here to execute a hit. And Emma and her 6-year-old son were sitting directly in the line of fire. Dame le sang. B asked, her smile fading as she noticed the sudden, terrifying shift in his demeanor. The relaxed businessman was gone. In his place was a predator, his eyes cold and dead, scanning the room with lethal calculation. What's wrong? Bia, Nico said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. I need you to listen to me very carefully and do exactly as I say. Do not turn around. B froze. The heavy, warm atmosphere of the table instantly evaporated. She looked at his eyes, then at his hand, which had slowly slipped inside his wet suit jacket, resting on the cold steel of a suppressed 9mm pistol he never left home without. Pick up Noah, Nico commanded softly. When I tip this table, you're going to drop to the floor and crawl through those kitchen doors. You do not look back. Do you understand me? B's heart slammed against her ribs. She pulled Noah onto her thick lap, her maternal instincts overriding her terror. She didn't ask questions. She gave one sharp, terrified nod. Happy birthday to us, Nico whispered. He kicked the heavy oak table straight up. The heavy oak table slammed upward, shattering crystal wine glasses and sending a spray of expensive Cabernet into the air. In the same terrifying fraction of a second, the deafening crack of gunfire erupted over the soft jazz playing through the restaurant's speakers. Tommy, the hatchet. Viti hadn't hesitated, but Nico was faster. As bullets tore into the polished wood of the overturned table, raining splinters over them, Emma didn't scream. Her mother's instinct kicked in with primal ferocity. She grabbed Noah, hauling his small body against her chest, and used her own broad, heavy frame as a human shield. She hit the floor, the breath rushing from her lungs as she landed on the expensive Persian rug, her large body entirely covering her terrified son. "Move now," Nico roared. He didn't cower. With a swift fluid motion that defied his tailored suit, Nico drew his suppressed 9mm. He fired twice over the edge of the table. The dull thwip-thwip of his weapon was barely audible over the screaming patrons, but Tommy Viti's right knee gave out, sending the enforcer crashing into a dessert cart. Emma scrambled, her knees bruised against the floor, her floral dress tearing, but she pushed her weight forward, dragging Noah toward the swinging aluminum doors of the kitchen. Nico was right behind her, acting as a rear guard, his tall frame positioned deliberately between the shooters and B's exposed back. They burst through the doors. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of screaming chefs, clattering copper pots and hissing flames. "Out the back, the alley," Nico ordered, grabbing B's thick arm to guide her through the maze of prep stations. Suddenly, a man dressed in a white sous chef uniform stepped out from behind the walk-in freezer. He wasn't holding a knife, he was holding a snub-nosed revolver. Before the fake chef could raise his arm, Nico lunged. He slammed the man against the stainless steel counters, the sheer brute force of the impact, knocking the gun clattering into a deep fryer. Nico struck him once across the jaw with the butt of his pistol, dropping the man instantly. "Keep moving, B." Nico barked, his chest heaving. Bay pushed open the heavy steel emergency exit, and the three of them tumbled out into the freezing torrential Chicago rain. The alley smelled of rotting vegetables and wet asphalt. Nico didn't stop to let them catch their breath. He ushered them down the dark corridor, his eyes scanning the shadows until they reached a sleek, black Lincoln Navigator, idling 2 streets over a backup vehicle he always kept, stationed precisely for worst-case scenarios. He shoved them into the back seat, climbed into the driver's side, and punched the ignition. The heavy SUV roared to life, tearing away from the curb, just as 2 armed men burst out of the alleyway behind them. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the car was the furious beating of the windshield wipers and Noah's soft, muffled sobbing into his mother's wet dress. Emma held him tight, her wide chest rising and falling in ragged, panicked breaths. She looked at the back of Nico's head, the way his knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the casual way his pistol rested on the passenger seat. "Who are you?" B finally asked. Her voice shook, but there was a fierce, demanding edge to it. "Nico, I want the truth. Right now." Nico pulled the SUV into an underground parking garage of a luxury high-rise in the South Loop, cutting the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. He turned in his seat, the dim garage lights casting harsh shadows over his sharp Italian features. He looked at Emma. She was drenched, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her makeup running, and her cheap dress ruined, yet holding her child, fiercely demanding answers from a man who had just shot someone. She looked like an absolute queen. "My name is Nico Rossetti," he said, quietly, offering no excuses, no softening of the blow. "I run the Rossetti crime family. The men in that restaurant were sent by my underboss, Carmine Russo. He's making a play for my seat." B's hazel eyes widened, but she didn't shrink back. "The Mafia. I offered to buy a chicken dinner for a Mafia Boss." "You saved a Mafia Boss from making a scene, that would have gotten him killed before he even sat down, Nico corrected softly. But there's something else, Bay. Carmine didn't just guess I'd be there. I go to L'Etoile d'Or every year on my birthday. Carmine paid off the manager Alistair to refuse me my private room so I'd be out in the open. But what does that have to do with me? Bea asked, her grip on Noah tightening. Why were we placed at that specific table near the kitchen? Alistair did that on purpose. Nico's expression darkened. What is your ex-husband's name? Bea blinked, thrown by the question. Greg Miller. Why Greg Miller? Nico repeated the puzzle pieces, clicking together with sickening clarity. A mid-level degenerate gambler who skipped town 3 months ago. Am I right? Yes, she whispered. He owes Carmine Russo $60,000. Nico explained, his voice laced with disgust. Carmine is a sadist. He couldn't find Greg, so he looked for his family. Carmine owns the local radio station that ran that anniversary contest. You didn't win, Bea. Carmine arranged for you to be given that reservation. He placed you at that table, directly in the line of fire to punish Greg. You and Noah were supposed to be collateral damage in my assassination. The reality of the twisted sick game washed over Emma. Her face crumpled, not with fear, but with a sudden towering rage. The years of struggling, of working double shifts at the bakery to pay off Greg's hidden debts, of trying to give her son one perfect birthday, all of it manipulated by a monster in a suit. Tears pricked her eyes, but she furiously wiped them away with the back of her plump hand. He used my son's birthday. He used us. Nico watched the tears mix with the rainwater on her soft cheeks. He felt a sudden violent protectiveness that terrified him. He had spent his life surrounded by people who used each other, but seeing this innocent, hard-working woman, broken by his world, ignited a rage in him that Carmine Russo would soon come to deeply regret. Nico reached over the console. His large, calloused hand gently cupped her soft, round cheek. He felt the warmth of her skin, the solid, real weight of her. I am going to fix this, Nico promised, his voice a low, lethal vow. Carmine Russo will never breathe another word. Your ex-husband's debt is erased, and nobody will ever use you or your son again. I swear it on my life. For the next 3 days, Emma and Noah were sequestered in Nico's fortified penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. They were guarded by 2 massive silent men named Arthur Gable and Paulie Walnuts Gatto, who surprisingly spent most of their time playing Mario Kart with Noah and eating the homemade chocolate chip cookies Bea baked in the commercial-grade kitchen just to calm her nerves. Nico was entirely absent. He was out in the city conducting a violent, systematic cleansing of his organization. The news reported a sudden, sharp uptick in gang-related incidents. Carmine Russo was found locked in the trunk of his own Mercedes at the bottom of the Chicago River. Tommy Vitti vanished without a trace. The corrupt Maître d'Alistair was abruptly fired, his reputation destroyed overnight, after an anonymous tip exposed his illegal kickbacks, leaving him unemployable in the city. By the 4th morning, the storm had passed. Nico returned to the penthouse just as the sun was rising. He looked exhausted. His suit rumpled a dark bruise swelling on his cheekbone. Emma was awake, sitting at the massive granite island in her oversized sweatpants and a worn-out t-shirt, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked up as he entered. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood up, her heavy thighs brushing against the counter, poured a second mug of black coffee, and slid it across the marble to him. Nico looked at the mug, then at her. He had a penthouse worth $10 million millions in offshore accounts and an army at his disposal. But right now, standing in front of this magnificent plus-size woman who grounded him like a ship's anchor, He felt like he had nothing at all unless he had her. "It's over," Nico said, his voice raspy. "Carmine is gone. His loyalists are dealt with. You and Noah are completely safe. I've set up a trust fund for Noah. It will cover his college, his living expenses, everything. And Greg's debt is wiped clean." Bea crossed her thick arms over her chest. "I didn't ask for your money, Nico." "I know," he said, taking a step closer. "That's exactly why I want to give it to you. You're the only person in 15 years who has looked at me and seen a man, not a bank or a bullet. You're a criminal," she said, stating a plain fact. "A dangerous one." "I am," Nico agreed, unflinching. "And you are a baker from the South Side who stood down a snob to buy a stranger a meal. We don't make sense, Bea. My world is dark and cold and paranoid. But you—" He reached out his fingers, lightly tracing the soft curve of her waist, entirely unbothered by her size. In fact, he reveled in it. She felt safe. She felt like home. "You are warm. You are real. I don't want to drag you into my darkness. I want to step into your light." Bea's breath hitched. "Nico, I'm a fat, exhausted single mother. I have stretch marks and a negative bank balance. I'm not some mafia princess." Nico smiled, a rare, breathtaking expression that wiped yours from his face. He pulled her against his chest, her soft, generous belly pressed intimately against his hard torso. He wrapped his arms around her wide back, holding her tighter than he'd ever held anything in his life. "Thank God for that," he murmured into her hair. "I'm done with princesses. I want a queen who knows how to flip a table." 6 months later, the Southside Sweetery was barely recognizable. The crumbling brick facade had been perfectly restored. The old broken ovens had been replaced with state-of-the-art European baking equipment. The crippling business loans were a thing of the past. Emma stood behind the counter, in a flour-dusted apron, her cheeks flushed with the heat of the kitchen, laughing as she handed a loyal customer a box of fresh cannolis. She hadn't lost a single pound, and she hadn't lost her fierce, unapologetic spirit. The bell above the door jingled. Nico walked in. He wasn't wearing a dark, intimidating suit today. He wore a simple pair of dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. He looked relaxed, healthy, and happy. Behind him, Arthur Gable was carrying a giggling Noah on his shoulders, the boy proudly wearing a junior baker's hat. Nico leaned over the glass pastry case, his eyes entirely focused on the beautiful heavyset woman who had saved his life. He didn't care about the flour on her face or the chaotic noise of the bakery. "Table for 3?" Nico asked, a playful glint in his dark eyes. Emma wiped her plump hands on her apron, leaning over the counter to pull him in for a deep, flour-dusting kiss. "Only if you have a reservation, Mr. Rossetti." "For the rest of my life, Bea," he whispered against her lips. "For the rest of my life." Did Nico and Emma's incredible journey from a dangerous mafia shootout to a beautiful, unconventional romance keep you on the edge of your seat? Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories happen in the most unexpected places. If you loved this thrilling, true-life drama, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. What would you do in Emma's shoes? Comment below.